We are talking about how to effectively raise capital without effing it all up. And I'm here with Brandon Hans and Richard Bell from Bar LLP, our lawyers we've been using for probably 6, 7, 8 years.
My goodness, something like that. Yeah.
How are you guys doing?
All
Well, thanks
good.
for having us.
Absolutely. We're talking about raising capital, and the best thing about the lawyers is the lawyers always have the best stories because they get to work with everybody, right? You only get to see like your friends, your coaching community, the different Facebook pages. They get to see everybody. So let's talk about raising capital. And if we were to simplify it on some of the basic steps that you recommend for people to take, and we understand that raising capital, when it comes to real estate investing or, outside endeavors is a pretty common goal once you hit a certain height in your investment journey or a certain distance in your investment journey. Let's talk about some of the basic steps that you recommend early on. And then we're going to talk about the worst horror stories you've ever seen personally. Sound good? People love horror stories, and I want to scare them. I want to give them nightmares for the weekend. So they have to call you on Monday and you have to, reassure them that everything's going to be okay. Let's go ahead. What are some of the first initial steps that you guys recommend? Brandon, let's start with you.
Sure.
Well, I say the first step that I would say to anyone who's looking to raise capital is to get your numbers lined up well in advance of closing. And this means getting your commitment letter or your LOI set up from your lender. This means getting your contract at least the conditional phase, talking to your lawyer about what the closing costs would be, so that you know exactly what you're dealing with in terms of how much you have to raise and when you have to raise it. The last thing you want is to go back to an investor or a fundraiser at the 11th hour saying, hey, I need another $100,000, which is not a good way to close a transaction. So
Definitely not. Definitely not. Okay, so get clarity first. Know exactly what you're asking for. Be specific. Okay. Richard, what's another step? What would you take it? We're going to go back and forth here as we go. Okay. What's
Okay.
another step along the way? What would you do after that?
Um, for a bunch of reasons, and I'll let Brandon get into the actual reasons, you want to be sure, for the most part, the people you're working with are, I think what we would call friends, business associates, or that the investment amounts are large. Brandon?
yeah, I think you're touching on securities there. Is that, yeah.
Yep.
So there's kind of two phases to capital raising, right? There's one is actually finding the money and closing on the asset. And the second one is making sure that you comply with securities legislation. Now, securities legislation is effectively consumer protection laws that protect people from investing in deals that are overtly risky or not disclosed properly. Now, there's a way to borrow money or invest money not having been a certain type of investor. But it usually requires certain filings done with the Securities Commission. It's expensive. It's got ongoing disclosure requirements. So what Richard's talking about there is approaching people or friends and family, because generally speaking, those people are exempted from most securities filings because they know you on a personal level. And I guess the rationale there is you're less likely to lie to a friend than some random person off the street. And so your first protocol is to probably go for friends and family. And if you're dealing with larger amounts of money, then you're moving into what are called the accredited investor class of investors. These are individuals who the Securities Commission effectively deems having, based on their wealth portfolio, have enough experience in the investment game to know the risks in and out. And so it kind of limits your requirements kind of in the back end, which can be pretty onerous when it comes to capital raising.
Right, right. And how many people do you think actually raise capital effective? How many of you actually would say, if you were to grade your clients and what you've seen before, what would you say the average is if you were to grade them? Are most of them doing it right? Are most of them doing it wrong? Would you grade them an A, B, C, D on average? What would you say the going rate is? The going score, the going grade?
Well, I'll let Richard think about this for a little
Yeah,
longer
I
because
bet.
you can see it. I think for me, it really depends on what it is we're doing. If you're doing a $2 million raise and you're bringing in five investors and you have those five investors lined up and they have the cash, you can do that in a way that's pretty straightforward. You can do the same thing if you have a joint venture or a limited partnership where you're bringing in more investors. And so it really depends on kind of the nature of the capital raise as to whether they're doing it properly or not. And a lot of times, too, people are doing it properly, but they just don't action it properly. So they've got the right plan, but they don't follow through with it. So I would say that it's very difficult to grade individual clients on a case by case basis or an average basis. I think that some people do it well in some deals, some do it poorly in other deals. My recommendation as to most people is to talk to your team well in advance. So you have the plan properly set up, and then you follow it accordingly.
So I was going to add, and I'm pretty much on the same page, I think, with Brandon. The ones I think we've seen that have gone not very well are when there's some miscommunication between the parties, the capital raiser and those that are putting the money in, as to exactly what the financial deal is there. Do they just have equity shares in a corporation? Is it a limited partnership that there's a fixed return? Is it some combination of those? Those become pretty critical, obviously, as you get closer and closer. And that I think has to become a pretty critical stage at the outset as you're working out what the deal is, working out how much money you want, talking to investors. You have to have a pretty clear direction, ultimately reduced to writing, on exactly what the return is or how the investors are contributing, how they get out of the transaction if at some point in the future they need to. Those are all super important things.
At what point should they pick up the phone or pick up the keyboard and connect with you?
Well, probably earlier rather than later.
Okay.
It's hard to say for sure when, but these things often take time unless you've done them 20 times in a row.
Okay.
I would probably suggest to most of my clients to have, kind of an introductory call when you've got an idea of what you want to do. So if you say, okay, well, I'm thinking of buying a place and if we're looking at something like an investment property in the $2.5 million range, kind of a turnkey multifamily.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not going to put any cash in. I'm going to do it all with my investors. As soon as you have that plan in your mind, it's probably a good idea to engage your team. Like in the same way that you probably want to talk to your client, Calvin, before they go ahead and put together an application for financing, we would probably want to have a conversation and say, okay, well, what is it you want to do? What's the best tax strategy with your accountant to set up this cash raising or this fundraising procedure? Mm-hmm. And it doesn't mean you have to action anything at that point in time, but at least everyone's kind of on the same page moving forward. Then right. As the process progresses along, then the lawyer's involvement obviously becomes a little bit more useful, a little bit more poignant, until you get to the point where the contract is unconditional, funds are coming in, and then, that's when the lawyer's basically takes over the whole file.
Right.
So earlier the better is always, and you arm yourself with knowledge, earlier the better. So
there's some misconceptions, I think, that some investors have. I think maybe I haven't seen it recently, that they're prepared to put money in, but they don't want to be part of the guarantee that likely will be required under the financing. So really, as Brandon is saying, the sooner the basic deal can come in, the basic strategy can come in. If there's going to be financing, there can at least be initial discussions. So there's lots of clarity between all of the parties. Who's going to be required to do what? Mm-hmm. Are you going to, if you have those investors Brandon is talking about and they say, I'll put money in, but I will never sign a personal guarantee, that's not happening. There may be some strategies that a Brandon and some other people can put together to still allow the transaction to move forward, likely limited partnership, something like that, where possibly the bank isn't as concerned about having the personal guarantee of the individual investors.
Right.
Those take some time to put together. Those can be costly. There's a bunch of things there. So, sooner rather than later, like Brandon says, once you get the general concept of the deal together, starting the conversation between realtor, lawyer, likely mortgage broker, those all become pretty critical in making sure things are going to go along cleanly and smoothly, and we're not using the F word at each other. There we go. You almost got it,
There
Calvin.
we go. I almost got it. And I think the most important thing, and I think a lot of reasons why people don't engage in it to probably, to receive an A grade or a B is a lot of people have a hard time having conversations of like, what if, right? It's kind of like a marriage. Like, what if we don't agree on kids? What if we don't agree on finances? What if we don't agree on health, values, political? Those are a lot of the most, those are the, I mean, why is there separations? Usually because of maybe one of those five reasons, could be many others. Could they be avoided if you had these challenging conversations, uncomfortable conversations early on? Probably. Do most people avoid them? Yes. Should you avoid them? No, right? And the nice thing about having a strong power team or a lawyer behind you is they're going to tell you these are the essential conversations you have to ask. Did you talk to X? Can you talk to X this week? Go through this. You need to, because this is a story of something else that I've seen one of my clients go through, and you don't want to be there, right? So the power team is there to help kind of, in a sense, maybe hold you accountable, provide you direction, showing you what worst case scenario looks like, but also helps you save money and allows you to be more efficient in your execution through the raising money process. I got a question for you guys. When you're raising money for an investment, whatever it is, what do you see the most typical partnership look like when it comes to like getting paid out on the dividends on the sale? What's the most typical? Because I have those questions all the time. Okay, I can raise money, but what does it look like on the back end when I actually have to pay people? Do I do the dividends thing? Do I just pay a lump sum? Do I pay them first and pay me back afterwards? What's the most typical? And I know there's a million different ways you can structure it. Let's just go basic, simple. What do you guys typically see?
You want me to go, Richard?
Well, I'll go quick because you probably have more complex than I do. Um, I think for the most part, the return is really the equity gain in the property split between the parties. So people are putting in a certain amount of money that gives them a percentage of the original equity that's going into the property. Maybe the investor is withholding themselves 50%, 20%, 30% of the equity. The other equity is split out between the other shareholders. And for the most part, the ones I see are pretty simple like that, if you want to call it that. Um, Ultimately, once the property is sold, say, the investors would get their money back, often without any interest gain. And the equity then is split according to whatever percentage agreement they had when they were originally, putting their money in and taking shares back. So that
Definitely.
that would be the simplest and probably the most common one that happens, I think. Brandon?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I entirely agree. It's the simplest, it's the cheapest, it's what people kind of understand. You give me 200 grand up front, you'll get your 200 grand, and then afterwards we'll split the profits, based on a set percentage. Usually what you talk about in those types of situations is what your exit strategy is, because that type of model is not something you generally hold for 20 years. That's usually we're going to buy it, we're going to do a lift, or we're going to do cash flow for 5 years and then offload it. And it's kind of more of a shorter term investment. And yeah, it's the reason it's the gold standard is because it's the simplest and it's easiest to understand. And really the documents that go into it, like the plan, I guess you call it, is fairly straightforward in those circumstances. So
It's
you can get as complicated as you want, though. You can
sure.
make it more unique. You can require buyouts, that sort of thing. But generally speaking, and Richard's right on that one.
And it's governed, that arrangement between the shareholders is governed by a shareholders agreement. And there's an awful lot of shareholders agreement that float around in the legal world. And again, Brandon can throw his 2 cents in, but they're often really similar type documents covering off many similar type scenarios. Um, so they're they're relatively straightforward. They can certainly be customized and get very, very complicated and detailed, but they're dealing with the things that we've just talked about, that buyout, who gets money out when, and typically they will have some ability to have some exit strategies. And I think that's often one that I see that people haven't really put their mind around. They haven't really thought about the exit strategy, and they often don't think about bad things. And when I'm meeting with people in some of those, I would say almost always at some point I say, what we have to do in this meeting is talk about the bad things. We have to talk about, what if you guys have a fight and you really can't get along? What if the project isn't performing the way everybody needs it to perform?
Mm-hmm.
What if there's a divorce? What if there's a death? What if there's a bankruptcy? All of those things that, as you were saying, Calvin, those little hidden conversations that people often don't really want to have amongst themselves, those are really important to have, and I believe have, to some extent, documented a solution to those things to allow for the project itself to continue to go, even though there may be something bad in the background happening that hopefully can come to a clean result based on a pre-agreed strategy.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I love the detail you guys have, and I know there's so many more layers to it, and I feel like it's not easy, especially for you two, when I ask a question like that, because there's so many layers to the onion that you see, and you want to be able to go through every single one of them, but it really does, it's case by case.
Thanks so much.
Thanks for having us.
Absolutely.